Okay. So now we're done with this data set. We just use this to generate the first kind of the basic structure of our dictionary. Now we're going to work with a zip file. A zip file is a huge file. It has way more information than we want. We're just going to reference it and just find information from the just the information we want just for the points of interest that we're interested in. Okay? So that zip file has information about users, comments, time, all this other stuff. We just want to know about the users, right? The first thing we need to do, just like with this file, is we need to open that zip file. And so I'm going to create a variable here, zip file name. This is going to be in my working directory. And it's called o2users.zip. Okay, so I'm just going to paste that name. This is my zip file name. And in order to open zip files, all you need to do is just import another dictionary, and this should be included with your Python, I think. If not, you can get it from plugins manager. And this will allow you to work with zip files just like you work with text files. Okay, so import zip files, and then I'm going to say with zip file dot zip file name as ZF. This is the same basic structure as this, but instead of this open function, which is built into Python for reading text files, we have this function, which is part of this library for reading zip files. Otherwise, it's the same exact thing. It basically opens the zip file for reading. I can, within this structure, now access it with this variable. And then once I'm out of that structure, it's going to close it. And let's see. So just to double check again that we're doing the right thing. First of all, before I do anything else, I'm going to get rid of these brackets up here. I'm going to read in all the entries now, okay? This doesn't take too much time. Okay. The first thing I want to do, just to double check that everything's working okay, I'm going to make a variable called numFiles. And I'm going to set this as the length of this parameter called ZF info list. Okay, so because this file is a zip file, it's not a text file with a lot of character information. It's literally a file that has a lot of other files in it. And this .info list is a function that will return information about the files. So it's going to return a file name, a file size, and allow you to work with these files in the zip file. Okay? In this case, all I'm doing is I'm taking that array with all the information about the files, and I'm just asking for the length of it. I'm going to print that, and now I'm just checking to make sure that I have the number of files that I'm expecting. Okay, just to make sure that it opened everything the right way. Make sure you have enough parentheses. Okay, we'll hit run. You can see it takes a little bit of time. It's reading through all these entries and building our dictionary, but really not that much time. Here we have the printout, 182,000 files, right? That should make sense. We have 182 locations in Weibo for the PRD. So we're on the right track. Let's see. All right, so now I want to actually go through and iterate over each of those files in that zip file. And then each of those files I have to open and get the information from them. Okay? So you can think of this as literally, if you go and open the zip file, it's going to give you a large list of files. Now Python is getting into that zip file, and then you can work with each file one after the other. Let's check out what's in this info list array. I just want to show you this really quickly. So I'm going to print actually the ZF info list. Right? Like I said, this has an array of all information about all the files in the zip file. I'm just going to print the first part of that array. So this is just saying it's a zip info object. But this object has certain properties that we can look at. For instance, we can look at the file name. We can look at the file size. And you can get the documentation for this online. Okay, so the first file name is actually the folder. The size is 0. If we look at the second file, it should start with our actual data. Okay, so here's the file name. This will give us a link that we can find that file in the zip file. And this is the actual size of that file in kilobytes. So we're actually going to use this zf.info list to iterate over all the files in the zip file. All right, and here I'm going to do a pretty simple loop. Remember, this was our basic loop for entry and entries. This will go through this whole array and each time assign this variable to that part of the array. There's a slightly more comprehensive way to loop over an array, and it involves this function called enumerate. And I'll explain why I'm doing this in a little bit. So just like when we used to use range or other functions to create a kind of a iterable array, this enumerate will create actually two pieces of information. In this kind of structure, it'll create an I, which will give you an integer as it's looping over, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And also the contents of that index in the array. Okay, so it's the exact same thing as here, except we can now access not only the information in the array, but also an integer which tells us where we are in the array. And we're going to use that a little bit later to keep track of how we're processing this data. Okay, so now we're iterating over this zip file. The next thing I want to do is I need to access each file in this zip file, okay? So the first thing I can do is actually start to open all these text files that are in the zip file. And I'm going to do it the same exact way I did up here. So right now, as I loop over this, f becomes the name of each file. So I'm going to say data equals zf.read f. Does that make sense? So as I loop over this, f is the actual file name in that zip file, and I can just use the same exact read function to actually take, look inside the zip file and read from this text file and store the information to data. Okay, and just like before, I'm going to say entries equals data.splitlines. So now this is taking each text file and splitting each line into its own, into an array. And then I'm going to pop the first line from that array. For the same reason I did it before, if you look at any one of these files, this is just one text file from that large zip file. You see the first line is just these entries. We want to get rid of that. I'll look at it here. Okay, so this is one of these UID files. The first one is the description of all the columns, and then we have the time, the comment, and then at some point here we have the user ID. Alright, so this will basically give us for each location all of the entries in the location, right? All the users that have checked in there. But to join it to the other data set, we actually need to find out the ID of the place, right? And the place ID isn't in this file anywhere, and this is also something that some of you emailed me about. You won't find that place ID in here. The place ID is actually in the name of the file. Alright? This is a little bit weird, but we can get that name or that ID so we can join that data straight from the name of the file. If you remember, this f is actually storing the name of our file. And all we have to do is take that file name and split it by the underscore and the dot to extract this string. Okay, I'm going to do that first. So I'm going to say POID. This is just my variable for storing the current ID I'm working with. I'm going to say f.filename. Or f.filename contains just this piece of text. f.filename.split. And here I'm going to split by the underscore. Alright, so it's going to give me 3 pieces of data. And I'm going to choose the last one. So if I know there's 3, right, I can say 0, 1, 2. And I can say, give me the third thing. But in case this is a longer path and you have other stuff here that you can't predict, it's a really quick shortcut. When you're accessing arrays, you can access it forward or backward. Right? I don't know if we've gotten into this yet. If you do integers like this, it'll count through the array forwards, you can also do minus. If you do -1, it'll give you the last entry. -2 will give you the second to last. So in this case, I know that all my file names will always end in this string, and whatever comes before it doesn't matter. I'm just going to take the last part of this array, the last thing after the last underscore. All right. So that gives me this, but still has this .txt attached to it. I just want the actual name of the place. So I'm going to take that and split it again. Now splitting by the dot, and this time I'm going to take the first thing in that entry. That makes sense. These splits are just chopping up strings, right? I have this really long string. I have some characters that are specifying where things are. I'm just chopping and subdividing until I get the piece of information I want. The first split extracts to this bit. Get out of here. And the second split extracts just that bit. Okay, so now POID will store that name. And the next thing I want to do is, once I have that name, I want to prepare a part of this dictionary in which I'm going to start storing these user IDs. Okay, so where we are right now, we have this big dictionary for all the places, and each place ID leads us to another dictionary which has a latitude and longitude. And I want to actually attach another place in that dictionary in addition to latitude and longitude, which stores a list of all the user IDs that have ever checked into that location. So again, not doing any processing yet, just building this big dictionary of all the information we're going to use. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, once I know this POID, I'm going to go into this dictionary. This is this dictionary we had before, right? I'm going to go into each POID. So here I find the one I'm working with. I'm going to go into that part of the dictionary, and then I'm going to specify a new key. So in this dictionary, I'm going to have a new key. So this is just a name, right? We call it user ID. And that key in each POID dictionary will be, an empty array. So if we have this structure here, for each one we have latitude, which has a number, longitude, which is a number. Now I'm adding another field here, which will be UID, and it's going to be, right now, just an empty array. I'm going to start putting user IDs into that array as I iterate over this data for each place ID. The point of this line, of making this empty array, just like when we made the empty dictionary, is there's functions in Python to append. You just put new stuff in there. If that thing doesn't exist, it's going to give you an error, so it doesn't exist. But if it exists and it's just an empty vessel, you can start putting stuff in there. You see here, we didn't need to specify any empty things because we just had one piece of data, so we were just literally specifying like this is this. Now we want to dynamically add stuff. Okay, so let's just test this, make sure everything's working so far. Okay, so remember when we looked at the first entry, it was actually this folder. And right now this is giving us an error because when it tries to get this user ID, this line doesn't contain any data about POIDs, right? So we just want to wrap this in a try except loop, just to make sure if we run into any files or links or sort of links into files that don't contain the information we want, they're just going to skip over it. Okay, so I'm going to take this piece where I'm getting these POIDs name, and for instance, the first thing we're going to get arrive to is this users folder. It's not going to have any information. It's going to error out in these lines. So I'm just going to wrap this in our try except structure. And if it fails for whatever reason, it's just going to continue. This is a really typical thing you'll see with messy data analysis. You're going to try to do something. If it fails, continue will just go on to the next part of the loop. It's going to skip over everything below it. And we're going to see this a lot. And remember the pitfalls of this, okay? Once you do something like this, it's very hard to troubleshoot anything in here. Because this error is actually good, right? It tells us something's going wrong. In this case, we can ignore this error. But if there's another error that's actually bad, or it's treating the data in a way you don't want to, it's going to be really hard to troubleshoot because it's just going to skip over it. It's not going to tell you that anything's wrong. Okay? And typically in these kind of things, you would print before the continue. You would print something probably more revealing than this, but something tells you that that error happened, it skipped over it, and you can go back. So for instance, if I do this and I have 128,000 error messages, I know that every single one errored out, and I know there's something wrong here. If I get one, maybe it's okay. It's just a bug in the data set. Okay, so this is what I didn't want, right? 128,000 error messages. So there must be some other part of this that is creating that issue. This is the same code that I've been trying to build here. I said use a -1, but maybe it's having a problem with that. Just doing the same thing, right? I just kind of put more information here. So it had to be the 2. Okay, so never mind. I don't know why it doesn't want to go backwards. It's weird. Anyway, okay, so you see here I wrap these in separate try except loops. And this is just to troubleshoot 2 potential sources of error. The first error can come from the fact that this file name is not in the right structure, so it's just going to continue after that. And the second error can come from the fact that this POID that I generate here isn't actually in this dictionary. Okay, so then it's going to continue after that. But if it passes both of these try loops or try structures, now it's taken this POID I have here and it's put in this new key here and it's made that into an empty dictionary. I can go back and just make sure that everything worked okay. I can access POID from that dictionary. And make sure that new array has been written into it. So I'm just going to take from here any of these POIDs. Alright, and here's what our dictionary looks like now. We have, for every ID, we have this dictionary, it has the latitude, longitude, which is from before. Now we have this empty UID array. And this, as we iterate over each text file, we're going to put in all the user IDs into this array. Okay, so all of our user entries are in this entry array. And just like before, we're going to loop over each one. Let's say for entry in entries. And we're going to split it to get, so again, we're now going over each one of these text files. We're going to split each entry to get just the pieces we want. And what we want is the user ID here, which is 0, 1, 2, the third piece of information. And actually, that's all we want, right? So for each line, we're going to find this user ID, and we're going to store it into that array. So for entry and entries, we're going to make a variable called UID. Say entry.split. Split by semicolon. I'm going to select the third piece. And the third piece in here is the user ID. And in some cases, this is another part of messy data. In some cases, the user ID is blank. Okay, in that case, we don't want to add a blank field into this user ID. So I'm going to do another try except loop. This isn't try except, this is just a test. Say if user ID is blank, it's just like a blank string. And continue. Okay, so you can see this cascade of all these things I'm doing, and if at any point anything fails, it's just going to continue on to the next piece of data. And once I have that ID, the last thing I want to do is actually put that ID into the array. But because a lot of the same people check into these places, I want this array to only have the unique IDs for each place. And for that, I'm just going to first test if the user ID is not already in the array. And if it's not, I'm going to put it into the array. Okay, and that's a pretty simple structure. You say if UID, so this is my user ID that I've gotten from this entry. Make sure you're still in this entry structure. So within this entry, I found the user ID. If user ID not in, and here I'm going to ask the dictionary with the POID I'm currently working on, what is in the UID array. And this is a really nice part about Python. This is really simple to understand, right? You can ask these things of Python. For instance, if you have any array, you can say if UID in, and it'll be true if that's already in there, or you can say not in. And this will happen only if this UID is not already in this list. And if that's the case, then we're going to actually call up the same array in here. And we're going to call the append function to actually add that user ID into that array. All right, that's it. So we're just filling this bag of user IDs with user IDs from the zip file, but we're only putting into the array if it doesn't already exist in there. So if we ask for this again, now I'm just asking the dictionary for this place ID. You see lat, long, UID, this is the user.